Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns and today I'm going to show you how to make this Art Deco wirework bracelet. Now I made two different versions here just to show you some examples. For instance, in the silver and copper one I used contrasting colour wires to really make the pattern stand out. But of course the design can look nice regardless how you choose to combine your materials. So if you want to learn how to make your own Art Deco wirework bracelet, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll be needing. I have two different gauges of regular round wire here. The first one is a 1mm, this is going to be the base wire, and I just chose it to be the silver colour. And then I have a 0.4mm for the weaving wire, and in this case here I chose it to be copper. Obviously you can choose whatever kind of colours that you want for your wire. And then the beads that we'll be needing are some 6mm rounds. These specific ones are some silver coated hematite gemstone beads, but of course you can choose whatever you want to. Just make sure the holes are large enough for two lengths of your 0.4mm to go through. And then finally I've got my clasp and extender chain, and of course some jump rings to put it together. So for the full material list you can check out the description box below the video, but otherwise let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. And then as for the lengths of wires that we'll need to cut, I have 8 lengths here of the 1mm of about 35cm each, and these are all the base wires that we're going to need. And then we need 2 lengths here of the 0.4mm of about 2.5 meters each, and these are going to be the weaving wires. So then we need to start putting all our wires together, and I'm just going to start working in groups. So I'm going to first take 4 of my base wires and just have them handy, and then I need to take 1 of the weaving wires and we need to start weaving this around the base wires. So I'll grab one of my base wires first of all, because we need to attach this weaving wire to the base wire first before we can actually weave the pattern that we want. And what I'm going to do is start towards one end of my weaving wire but leave a bit of a tail, and also towards one end of the base wire, but again leave a bit of a tail, about 7 to 10 centimeters or so. So we need to use some of the wires to finish off ends with. And then I'm going to put the weaving wire behind the base wire, and we need to attach this by wrapping it around. So basically coiling it around the base wire just 2 to 3 times for now, just so it's on there nicely. Something like that, and we can always take a chain hose and make sure to squeeze them close together so the wraps are sitting right next to each other. So now it's attached. You can still move up and down the wire like that, but it's attached so we can keep weaving with it. So I have my tail still just going out of the way. We can also use that to hold on to. Then I'm going to bring in my next base wire and lay that above the previous one on top of the weaving wire as well. Then I'm going to take the long end of the weaving wire that I'm weaving with and then bring it across the top of both of them, and then down behind both of them, and then across the top of both of them again. Make sure your wraps are nice and flat next to each other, so like that. And then we need to come up between the two, which we can then also use that to help push down so the wraps become nice and tight. And then we wrap around the top one by itself and then have the wire come down behind both of them again. And then what I like to do is get my chain nose here and help push my wires into position. So I kind of put my pliers on either side there and just help push it close and kind of force it a little bit at an angle to sit how I want, something like that. Then I'm going to grab my next base wire and have that be the new top one. Then I'm going to go over the top of all 3 now with the weaving wire. Again down behind, and I also like to kind of push the weaving wire down here because I want to make sure that this still lays flat next to the other wraps that I've already done and doesn't start to cross over. And then do it once more. So again we have them flat next to each other there. And then I like to also go in and just squeeze them down when I have them in the right position. And also close them together. And what we're just going to do as well is go up between the top 2 base wires and then just wrap around that top one by itself, just like we did before when we just had the 2 base wires, and then down behind them all again. Just make sure to push that nice and tight. So now we're reaching kind of that midpoint. And again, I also like to keep flattening it out. And then we have one final base wire for this group that we're making right now. Have that be the new top one. And then go over the top of all 4 of them with the weaving wire. Down behind again. And then one small, just like we've done the other times. So 2 wraps right flat next to each other across the top of all 4 of the base wires, and then flatten that out. And now this is basically the midpoint of this little section. Now we've moved our way upwards, now we need to come back down again, kind of a graduation. Then to do that we need to come up between the 2 middle ones. Just get my wire through there. So right between the 2 middle out of the 4 wires. And again, use that to push down. And then we need to come down between the top 2. So we're basically wrapping around that second one from the top by itself. Make sure to push that tight. And then I come all the way down behind and go over the top of the bottom 3 wires, so come down in the same place that I just did before. And then again, we do that twice. So this is an equivalent to the double wrap on the other side of that midpoint. Push that flat and squeeze it together. It becomes nice and tight. And then I come up between the bottom 2 base wires. To then just wrap around the second one from the bottom. So I go down between the 2 middle ones to do that. Push that nice and tight. And then just wrap around the 2 bottom ones twice, because that's an equivalent to the first time we did kind of a double wrap there on the other side. Push that down. Again, I just flatten that out and push it close together. And then I'm going to go down and just wrap around that bottom base wire by itself. So kind of coiling around that now. And I do that 4 times, so that's 1, and then 2, 3, and then the 4th one, just like that. And then I just push it all close again. So that's the first little section that we have here. So then I've just put that to the side, and then I'm going to grab the remaining wires that I haven't used yet. So the remaining 4 base wires, and then also the other weaving wire. And we'll basically need to do the same thing now with this group, but just kind of working mirrored, because they're going to be on opposite sides of the final bracelet. So what I'm just going to do with that, it's the same basic techniques, the same weave, but instead of putting a weaving wire behind our base wire like this and using this length, I'm going to flip it around and then put the short end down here and the long end that I'm going to be weaving with here, and then start wrapping this around, and it's basically just in the opposite direction. So I'm just wrapping it around to attach it first of all, and just get them a little bit closer to each other. So like that, and then the next weaving base wire, that we need to add in, I'm going to now put below the first one, like that, and then we'll go over the top of both of them for that double wrap. So just like that, and then come up between the 2. to wrap around, in this case now, the bottom one by itself. And then just remember to kind of squeeze it nice and tight and get it right in the position that you want, and also flatten it out. And then for the next base wire, again, that's the new bottom one now. And then we wrap around over the top of all three of them to do the next double wrap. So you can see it's the same principle. We're kind of just building the graduation downwards now instead of upwards. And then you just get to the same point as I showed you before. So complete this and then do 4 single wraps on that, in this case the top wire, just like we did before. So now made both groups here, we end up with these two separate parts that are opposite each other, and that's how it's going to be throughout. And then we're going to have the beads running through the middle of them, so right in between. So that's the point we got to now. Remember, we need to finish off after doing 4 individual wraps on either side, and then what we're going to do is get all the way to the ends of both of these long weaving wires. So I'm just going to put them out of the way and find the ends of them. So that's what I then have here, the 2 ends of the weaving wires. Then I'm going to grab my very first bead and just put that onto one first of all, and then we can let this slide all the way down the weaving wire, making sure we avoid kinks here, to get it down to not get tangled up to where my weave is. So it's going to end up sitting like that, but we also need to get the other length through. So you can just kind of release the bead a little bit further down, and then we need to take the length from the other group, make sure it's the other one, and put that through the same bead but in the opposite direction. And then you just want to pull this all the way through gently to avoid any kinks, because we obviously don't want to damage the wire if we can help it. Just gradually getting it down. Until we then reach the other group, and we can then bring that close. And so pulling the weaving wire all the way through, and then we can start to get the effect of how it's going to actually sit. Make sure then pull both weaving wires so they sit tight. Through, just like that. You can see that bead now ends up in the middle there. And this is where the bead is now going to sit. So the point we're at now is we obviously kind of need to continue the weave, but also fasten this in place. Now it can be a little bit fiddly right now because it's all kind of still open and moving around, but once we have the first bead in place and get the second one as well, it's going to be a lot easier to work with. So if you feel like it'll be a bit easier to work with, you can always put the ends here in some kind of clamp to help hold it while you keep weaving. But otherwise we just need to keep weaving like I said, and just do one side at a time again. So doesn't matter what side you start with, but what we need to make sure of is that we continue in the same direction as well. So the weaving wire here, originally they're coming from behind and then going through the bead. So now what I'm going to do is bring this over the top, so we can then keep wrapping in the same direction as we would as if we hadn't added the bead in. Then I'm going to wrap around that bottom base wire out of this group of 4 by itself 4 times, because remember we did 4 times before adding the bead in, and then we're going to do 4 times after adding the bead, so the bead ends up in the middle in between these little sections that we're going to then do. So do that 4 times. I think that's my 3rd one. And then the last one. Before I move on, I like to just push it nice and close again. And then here on this side, so the top one that I'm working on first of all, we can go straight into the weave again. Now what I personally do like to do is actually just do the other side as well, at least the individual wraps, just to fasten the bead a little bit more. So again, you make sure the weaving wire goes over the top of the base wire, and then we wrap around the, in this case, top one on the bottom group here, out of the 4. And again, do that 4 times, just like we did before adding the bead in. To basically just get to the same point for now as the opposite side. And then that's already fastened it a little bit more in place. Also push that close together. So there we go. So make sure, most important thing really is just to make sure we don't really have too much, if any ideally, of the weaving wire between the base wires and the bead. So we get the bead as close to the sides as possible. So now we just pick back up that weave again here. You can start with either side, do that little section that I've already showed you. Now obviously the base wires are already there, so we don't need to add them in. Then go to this side, do the same thing. Make sure to do the 4 individual wraps on the base wire, the bottom one on the top group and the top one on the bottom group, and then we add in the next bead again in this middle of this section where we're just doing around 1 base wire. So now I added in my second bead there, so it's sitting in between the 2 groups, and then you just want to start weaving again. So on either side, make sure the weaving wires are going over the top of the base wires, and then wrap the remaining 4 wraps there around that bottom base wire on the top here to trap that bead in place as well. Twice, make sure to push them down nice and tight. Again, so the bead ends up sitting in the middle. 3, and then the 4th one. And then straight away I'm just going to go to the opposite side, so the bottom group here, and do the same. So that's then around the top base wire by itself. That was 1, and then 2. The 3rd one, and then the final one, before we then have to move on to do the next section in the weave itself. Again, kind of in between steps, I like to just make sure to push everything close together, so I get the 2 sides as symmetrical as possible, because obviously we kind of want them to follow each other so the beads get even as well. And already there's far less movement in it now than there was with just that first bead. So you basically just want to continue like this with the weaves, these little kind of pointed sections in between where we then add the beads in until we have the length that we need, minus how we're going to finish off the end and obviously add a clasp as well. So now that I reached the length that I need here, what I make sure to do is after the last bead that I added in, I then made another section there on either side, and then also I wrapped each of these weaving wires around the individual base wire a couple of times, just how we started out in the beginning as well. So now what we need to do is finish them off, because we're done using the weaving wire. So I'm just going to flip it to the back here, because I want to finish it off, and also that's why I finished it wrapping around a single base wire by itself to make it secure. So I'm just flipping it around to the back, and then I'm going to get some wire cutters here, some flush cutters, and then go in and cut off the excess. And then take some chain nose pliers or flat nose, and then make sure to squeeze that down. And I like to kind of push it down and then roll it a bit in the direction that the wrap is going in to make it kind of tuck in between the base wires and get it out of the way. So just finish off all these lengths on both ends in this way. Once we then finish off the weaving wires, then we need to deal with the base wires and also make the ends we can obviously attach a clasp. So I'm just going to start on one end at a time, and what I like to do is we need to bring these kind of over each other, the groups of the base wires. So I'm just going to take the right one, it doesn't matter which one you cross over and under, but I'm just going to take the right one here and start pushing it towards the other one, and then you're going to find this part kind of rounding in over the end of the bead there. And then the other one that's coming underneath, I'm just going to take all them and go in the opposite direction. So you have the base wires there crossing over each other, over and under each other. and basically to the point where the end of your weave on either side kind of meets up right there in the middle. So we get this nice shape on the end, tapering off in a way. Now what I personally just like to do is get to this point and then I flip my piece around and then just do the same thing on the other end, just to try and keep it symmetrical before I move on to actually finish off the wires. Once I then shape both ends, then what we're going to do is make a wrap loop so we can of course attach our clasp. So what I'm going to do is just do one end at a time and just flip my piece a bit to the side here. Now we're going to be working with the two inner wires, the one from either side, to do this. So I'm just going to take the one that's behind the other one. So in this case, in my case here, is the ones that are going out towards the right side. They're coming behind the other ones. So I'm going to take the inner one out of those and then get my chain nose or flat nose all the way down to where the crossover point is, so you can't really get your pliers any further. Then I need to put a bend into it to come basically straight out of the end of the bracelet. So something a little bit like that. You can adjust it if you need to. Then what we're going to do is take the inner one from the other side that's crossing over it, and we then need to wrap that around it right where that bend is. So I'm just going to keep hold of all these wires that are crossing over there just to try and stop anything from moving that I don't want to move. Then I'm going to wrap this other length around the one that I bent. Try and make sure to push it all the way down to that bend. And this is kind of my initial step to get the wrap loop done. You can always use pliers to help squeeze it tight. This is pretty thick gauge wire, so wrap this around a couple of times. Make sure they're nice and tight wraps. Just need to tighten that up a little bit more. Just a couple of times will be fine. And I'm also, forgot to mention here, working with the front pointing towards me of the bracelet, because there is kind of a front and a back to this. You'll see that especially in the weave, if you flip it around, it's just slightly different if you look closely. So just making sure I've got these wraps nice and tight. And then when you feel like you have, then we need to finish off. We can cut off the excess of this wire that we just wrapped. So I like to flip it around here where I finished off the wire. Go in and cut off the excess. Using your wire cutters. And then get rid of that. And then just make sure we squeeze that end down, so that's not going to irritate or catch on anything. Just like that. And then we have this wire still sticking straight out. We're going to be using that to actually make the wrap loop with. Once we've then done that, we're just going to leave that for now. Then what I'm going to do is go in and deal with the other remaining wires. So we have 3 left on the one side and 3 on the other side there. Now you'll find, again, this is in the front of my piece, you have the 3 that are crossing over the front, so over the other ones. I'm going to take them first, and then I want to start bending them basically towards the back. So in this direction, the direction that they're kind of going in, but I just take all 3, and then again I keep my fingers on where the wires are crossing over to make sure everything keeps its shape, and start bringing them towards the back, and then push them as flat as you can against the back there. Let's flip it around and have a look. So they are then kind of wrapping around the other 3 from front to back, and then we can just adjust anything that we need to. You kind of want to make sure they come down in the same direction where they're coming from, so they're overlapping themselves as well. Something a bit like that. And then what we need to do is go in and get rid of the excess of these. So again, I get my flush cutters, and we need to cut them off just a bit after where they've overlapped the other ones here. So there's a couple of millimeters kind of sticking out after them. Just need to find the right place there. Cut off the excess. Just do one at a time. Like that. Then that little end that we've left kind of sticking out, I'm going to take my chain nose pliers, go in and grab that end on all of them ideally if you can. And then I kind of flick my wrist towards the bracelet to get the ends to go back in towards kind of themselves. So like that, just gently. And then you just go in and squeeze them down to make sure to get them as flush against the other ones as possible. Because then you find that the ends of the wires there are kind of butting up against themselves, which will get rid of them, so we don't have to worry about them catching or scratching on anything. And also just make sure you run your fingers over it to feel that there isn't anything there that's going to catch or scratch. So that's 3 of them finished off. Then with the piece still flipped to the back, we then need to take the other 3 wires there. I'm making sure this is where I just finished off the other ones. I grabbed the other 3 here that are kind of just sticking out, all 3 together if you can. And now I want to start bending them over the top of the other ends that we just finished off as a group there. Get them down over them nice and tight, again in the same direction where they're originally coming from. So something like that. So basically we're doing the same principle with these as we did with the first group. And then go in and cut off the excess again. Again, making sure to leave that little end of all of them. Actually, I just want to tighten that down just a little bit more before I cut off. Something like that there. Then go in and cut off the excess, leaving that 1 or 2 millimeters. Cut straight across all of them. Remove the wire and then take your chain nose pliers, just grab the very end of these 3, do the little flick of the wrist to bend them inwards, and then when they're bending inwards towards the piece, you can go in and squeeze them down and kind of flatten it all as much as you can, and just make sure the ends aren't sticking out. And then we're basically finished off those groups of wires, and we're just left with this one in the middle that we need to make a wrap loop with. To then make the wrap loop, we're just going to take our chain nose or flat nose pliers, and then I go in from the side here and then place my pliers on this single wire that we have left, just a few millimeters above where that wrap is, so it leaves a bit of space. Then I do a bend to the side there, about 90 degrees or so. Then I take my, in this case I'm going to be using my 6-step bell making pliers, but you can also use round nose pliers. I just like using these because it makes sure I get the exact size I want, and I can always also use the same step on the pliers to use for the other end, so I make sure the 2 loops become the exact same size. And then I bend the end back around all the way to make a full circle, so like that. Then I take my flat nose again, and then I wrap what I have left of the wire below the circle on that little space there that we left originally before making the bend, basically until I don't have any more space to wrap, so it becomes nice and continuous. And then we just go in, cut off the excess, get rid of that, and then again just make sure to squeeze that down so it can't irritate on anything. And that's how I've then made a wrap loop on the end using that single wire that we had left. Now of course you just want to finish off the other end in the exact same way as well, and you can attach whatever clasp you want to. So now finish off both the ends and I've attached my clasp and extended chain as well. Then we just gotta shape it so we can obviously wear it. So you can either shape this around something that has the size and shape you want it to have, so like a bracelet mandrel or anything you have handy at home, or just use your hands and fingers. So again, make sure you have the front of the piece pointing outwards, and then you start putting a curve into it. So go into a place and start gradually putting a curve, and I go back and forth, just like this. Don't go into just one place and make a big bend because that'll put it out of shape. But just get it gradually, the ends there closer and closer together so we can obviously use the clasp. So the bracelet is now complete, and these are the two that I made. So the silver and copper one that I showed you how to make in the video, and then I also chose to make one in bare copper wire because I plan on oxidizing it, as I think this design would really lend itself well to doing that, because it would really make the weaved pattern stand out. Now I am getting to the point where I have a few pieces ready for oxidizing, as I like to do it in batches. And I do plan on doing a video about that quite soon, so if you're interested, stay tuned on my channel for that. Now I am curious, do you prefer your jewellery oxidized or non-oxidized? Do let me know in the comments down below. Personally, I do prefer non-oxidized, but I do also like the look that oxidizing certain pieces can give. But regardless what you plan to do with your piece, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.